So to all the panelists and attendees, we will be recording this session and the recording has begun. Okay, Oman says the Deputy Governor will join in 5 minutes. Thank you for everyone who is joining our webinar. We'll start in just a few minutes. We appreciate your patience. For all attendees, please put yourself on mute. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon.
Hello, Madam Deputy Governor. Thank you so much for being with us.
Hello.
So now that we're all here, we can get started. So thank you so much to everyone for joining our event. We will begin now. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Women on the Rise, boosting female leadership networks across Africa with a focus on Rwanda. This is a series of events across Africa in 2021, co-hosted by the United Nations Capital Development Fund and 100 Women in Finance to bring visibility to women in leading finance roles across Africa. I'm Esther Pan-Sloan, the head of Partnerships, Policy and Communications at UNCDF, and I'll be your moderator today. We are excited for today's event, which will feature remarks from Preeti Sinha, the Executive Secretary of UNCDF, Amanda Pullinger, the CEO of 100 Women in Finance, and a fireside chat between UNCDF Goodwill Ambassador Sonia Gardner and the Honorable Soraya Munyana Hakuziyaremye, Deputy Governor of the National Bank of Rwanda. After the fireside chat, there will be a Q&A session so that audience members can ask questions of our speakers. The goal of this meeting is to boost awareness of and build links between the dynamic women leading the public and private financial institutions across Africa into the future at this exciting time. So let's get started with our first speaker, Preeti Sinha, the Executive Secretary of UNCDF. Preeti, over to you.
Thank you, Esther. And again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, bonjour, bonsoir, toutes, dear excellencies, colleagues, friends, welcome. I'm very pleased to launch today the first of a series of events focused on promoting women in finance that UNCDF and 100 Women in Finance will jointly co-host in 2021. At UNCDF, we like to believe we are the UN's flagship financing agency for the world's least developed countries, and we take this mission very seriously. And we launched this partnership with 100 Women in Finance earlier this year in spring, after being introduced to this terrific organization by Sonia Gardner, our Goodwill Ambassador for Gender Equality and Access to Finance. Both organizations share the goal of promoting more women to the highest levels of decision-making power in the finance industry. And we are glad to be partnering to expand 100 Women's network of 20,000 members to the continent of Africa. We are beginning in Rwanda, a vibrant country with a dynamic young population and a global reputation for gender equality. However, in contrast to the gender parity seen in Rwanda's parliament, the percentage of women in senior executive or board level in finance remains less than 30%. UNCDF has been present in Rwanda since 1981, promoting community empowerment through infrastructure development and service delivery. Our colleague, Omon Ukpoma Ulaya, is our Kigali-based investment officer present here, supporting the UN country team and building a deal pipeline with us. We will put her email in the chat, and those of you joining us from Rwanda can please connect with her. In Rwanda, UNCDF helps the UN engage with the private sector and fill the missing middle finance gap by sourcing and supporting promising SDG-aligned businesses with grants, technical assistance, concessional loans, and guarantees. And we have 2 blended funds in the making as well. When these companies are strong enough, we aim to hand them over to other sources of more commercial capital, both domestic and international, to help them grow and scale, and therefore empower the community around them. We use this approach to support small and medium enterprises, strengthen fintech firms, and drive the digitization of payments across various economic sectors in Rwanda. We are focused on agriculture, financial inclusion, renewable energy, and especially women-led and youth-led companies and businesses that serve the vulnerable and underserved populations. We source potential investees from the ecosystem here in Rwanda, including from our sister UN agencies and their successful initiative. For example, UNDP's Youth Connect program. We also plan to integrate digital tools by offering client-centric digital products in the areas of finance, education, and health as identified by the government of Rwanda. Of course, climate remains very important to us, and both climate and gender tend to cross-cut all our investments. UNCDF continues to support the government's efforts to drive enrollment and consistent savings through the long-term saving schemes, Ejo Heja, leveraging community-based village savings and loan associations to expand digital financial inclusion at the community level. In conclusion, UNCDF is very pleased to partner with 100 Women in Finance to promote a strong network of female business leaders from both public and private sectors in Rwanda and across Africa more broadly. We invite all stakeholders, particularly those committed to empowering women and youth, to join us as we work to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals in Rwanda and across the African continent. With that, thank you, Esther, and back over to you.
Thank you so much, Preeti. Now we'll turn to Amanda Pullinger, the CEO of 100 Women in Finance. Amanda, over to you.
Thank you, Preeti, and thank you, Esther. Hello, everyone. I'm Amanda Pullinger. I'm CEO of 100 Women in Finance, a global nonprofit association of professionals, women and men in the finance industry. We're really delighted to be co-hosting our first joint event with the UNCDF today. 100 Women's mission is to empower women in the finance industry at every stage of their career, with our vision being that by 2040, 30% of senior executive and investment roles should be filled by women globally. We're committed to building a more diverse and gender equitable finance industry. Each program we offer centers around promoting diversity of thought, raising visibility, and empowering women at each career stage to find their own personal path to success. Events such as today's are just one of the ways we connect with each other to move our mission forward. However, even with our efforts and those of so many other organizations working towards gender equity, we still have quite a way to go for women to hold even close to the number of investment or executive roles in finance that men currently hold. We're really happy to partner with UNCDF to take forward our mission to empower women and facilitate the necessary work to build the networks, educational programs, and pipeline for a new generation of female leaders in finance. 100 Women has grown from a single New York City location 20 years ago to a global community with 27 locations around the world. Thanks to a generous donation to 100 Women's 20th anniversary CEO Circle from Dr. Dambisa Moyo this year, we are exploring the potential for 100 women groups on the African continent, starting with Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa. We are also working on programming focused on both the continent and African women in the financial services industry. Today's session is one of the ways in which we're working with UNCDF to spotlight African women leaders and make them visible to our global membership and also to the next generation. We believe visibility of female role models and hearing from women in leadership positions is key to inspiring and encouraging both colleagues today and the next generation of female leaders. If you're in the financial services industry and are interested in helping us move our mission forward, we encourage you to join 100 Women in Finance through our website, www.100women.org. By doing so, you will see firsthand the efforts we are making, and you can participate in our programs. Please also follow us on LinkedIn. I'm looking forward to the conversation today between the Honourable Soraya Hakuzi-Iremeye, Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Rwanda, and Sonia Gardner, President of Avenue Capital, our Board Chair Emeritus at 100 Women, and UNCDF Global Ambassador. We are sure to gain insights on what it takes to distinguish yourself in a career in finance and public service. We're grateful to you both for the time you're taking today to participate. Thank you. Thank you also to UNCDF for partnering with 100 Women and this program. And with this, back to you, Esther.
Thank you very much, Amanda. So now we'll turn to the main portion of our session today, the fireside chat between Sonia Gardner and the Honorable Deputy Governor. Sonia, over to you.
Thank you, Esther. And thank you, Preeti and Amanda, for having this wonderful partnership that continues to help so many women in finance and all the wonderful work that 100 Women in Finance does and UNCDF. Soraya, I am honored to be hosting the fireside chat. And I wanted to start by obviously thanking you for joining us today, but really with your breadth of experience across the private sector, trade, and public service, I thought it would be nice if you could give the audience just some background on where you grew up, what did you study, and how did you get to the wonderful position where you are today?
Thank you very much, Sonia. And let me start by, first of all, thanking Preeti and Amanda and the UNCDF team, and as well as 100 Women Finance for this invitation, and also focusing on Rwanda today, so as we discuss this very important issue of how we can make sure that we have more women leaders in the financial services sector. And really to maybe give a bit of background, and I grew up partly in Rwanda and partly in Belgium. I was born in Belgium but raised in Rwanda, then went back to Belgium for university, and then that's where I started my career.
And in terms of studies, really, I remember in high school, I focused mainly on science. So I was doing maths and physics and started really university, not sure of what I wanted to do. I hesitated first between, engineering a program and then ended up doing a program in Belgium that they call business engineering, which really includes some very engineering classes and science in the first 2 years. It's a 5-year program, master's program. And then the last 3 years, you really focus on the business areas. And I chose finance and marketing at the time. The reason I chose finance was really, I think, out of a curiosity, because I had never done any classes in economics or finance during high school. And whenever I would watch the news, whenever they would talk about economics or financial markets, I would get totally lost. So I said, let me give it a shot and really try and understand more about that finance world, which was a mystery to me. And I think, grew to actually have a passion in it. And I studied at the Solvay Business School, which is now called the Solvay School of Management in Brussels at the University of Brussels. And then after that, I also did a postgraduate in the US at the Thunderbird Global School of Management, where I specialize in international management. So briefly, that's what I did in my academic background.
Thank you. It's always so interesting to hear how someone was sparked in terms of their interest in finance. And what led you to the National Bank of Rwanda?
Well, I would say it's really, I wouldn't say it's something that I grew up or started my career thinking of. When I started my career, I was really wanted to get into international banking, and that's where I started my career in security services at the Bank of New York, which at the time was one of the largest global custodian bank. That was in Brussels, Belgium. And I, after a few years, that's when I did my postgrad, then ended up really going into corporate banking at Fortis Bank at the time, which was taken over later by BNP Paribas. And at the time, I spent about 6 years, and it's at the time where I was thinking about coming back home to Rwanda, and then looking for an opportunity. And of course, my first option was to start applying to banks. And by coincidence, or I think destiny had it, that I met at the time the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who was looking to recruit people from the diaspora, what was also, looking to especially which I liked, young women who had an interest to come and serve the country. And then I remember saying, I have no knowledge or no experience in diplomacy or international affairs, but she was open-minded to say, with your exposure, I think you can come and help us in the restructuring of the ministry and have a more management role than diplomacy, which I thought was, something that I could do, but especially, also I think being very humbled by the opportunity to be able to serve at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So that's how I started in public sector, and first did 2 years working as advisor to the minister. And then I think finance called me back. So that's how I joined again the banking sector at ING, and moved back to Europe, but working in London this time around, and with a goal really to work again 3-5 years in international banking and come back home. And I knew at that time really finance would be the sector I wanted to still grow in. And at the time, after 3 years, that's where I was already looking at opportunities in Rwanda, and was offered this job as a which I still consider the honor of my life, to be appointed as Minister of Trade and Industry. Although it was not finance, but I gave it a shot, because I thought one, it's an opportunity to serve the country again, to be back in Rwanda. And I could use also the experience I had gained being in management, also working in private sector, to sort of contribute to the development of the country and development of our private sector. And I did this for 2.5 years until I was appointed as deputy governor at the National Bank of Rwanda. And it's, almost like a full circle going back to banking but in a supervisory role. So that's briefly how I ended up in this position today. But I think it really ties into what I've done most of my life. I would say the last 18 years, most of it was in private sector, in banking. And in most of the positions I've held, even the last one as risk managers, I was really covering financial institutions, and also with also a portfolio and managing the risk in financial markets products. So I think this is really something that has prepared me for this job, although I had not thought about it before.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's very interesting. Given your leadership role and the honorable position that you hold, I think it would be interesting for our audience to hear, what is your personal definition of leadership, and what do you think makes a good leader? So just for advice to the audience and really to hear more about your personal thoughts on that subject.
Thank you, Sonia, for that great question. I think if you had asked me these questions probably 5 to 10 years ago, I would have given a list of what we learn in business schools, right? What makes a great leader, and the skills of it, a visionary, someone who empower their teams. And these are, I think, characteristics that are still valid, but more so, I think, in this ever-changing environment we're in, and what we're learning as well as we go through crisis. I was fortunate enough, now I say it, but at the time, I think it looked more than a challenge during the financial crisis, the global financial crisis in 2008. I was a junior banker. So for me, I thought, the world is crumbling. I will never get another shot at banking. And yet that's where we really learn the skills that will be useful for the rest of our career. And that's also where we see at the time, the managers that stood out and what was their maybe what made them different from other managers that we could see as junior at the time, that were either being overwhelmed by events. And I think resilience now is one quality that I would say is essential for a leader, and transparency. Communicating thoroughly with the team what we do know, what we don't know, and being very open about it, and trying to build also resilience in the team. And the third, I think that's more important, is early on and really encouraging being young women professionals, especially in finance, which is a very competitive sector and still very male dominated, unfortunately. I think making sure that your voice is heard, because you might not know it, especially when you start your career, but you have something that stands out just because of having different experiences. And I think at the time, I didn't know that it mattered, the gender, but I think as you move up the ladder, then you see less and less people that look like you, that are women, that you can share women experiences with. And then you realize that your take on the world and the way you also, I think, will approach your role is going to be different, mostly with your male counterparts. So that voice must be heard, because in any case, we're half of humanity, right? And even though it doesn't show in most of finance leadership roles, that's how it should be. So I think it's important as a leader to also recognize your difference and make sure that your approach and your take on the world is heard. And then lastly is, I think, what makes a good leader is also if you're a pioneer in any sector, make sure that you're not the last one. So, and especially for women, generally we celebrate first women who are, I don't know, bank CEOs or ministers, but how do they make sure they're not the last ones? What are they doing to really pull the other women in that direction and share their experience, but also make sure that they're creating room for more women to embrace that career and to also excel and be at the leadership table, if I can call it so. So for me, I think it's important really to also measure leadership by the number of women that I'm saying here because we're talking about women in finance, but the number of people that you empower so that they can take up leadership positions in the end and even go higher than you have before. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's wonderful insight. And I couldn't agree with you more. And that really speaks to the partnership between UNCDF and 100 Women in Finance and really the mission and the great work that 100 Women in Finance has done over the last 20 years. It's to inspire other women and have senior women be role models and share the wonderful insights that you're doing. What do you think has been one of your biggest challenges? And it would be interesting to hear whether that challenge had anything to do with your gender or whether that was a challenge that you think would have occurred irrespective of gender, because sometimes we focus a lot on the challenges that we face because of our gender. And it's also good to hear challenges that you face as a leader that you think, irrespective of gender, that our male counterparts would face the same challenges. So a little bit of a two-part question there.
Sure. I think probably I will divide, the answer in two. Probably the challenges I've encountered in the financial sector in Europe, would be different, but, compared to, challenges that you face when you're working, one in public sector, but also in Rwanda. If I start by Europe, I think one of the main challenge when I started my career, that was in 2003, was that I was embracing a career that I hadn't realized would not be as inclusive or as diversified, because it's only when you get in that you start, seeing that probably you're the only one African or the only woman in the sector in your team. And I think what at the time I remember that one, we were not talking too much about gender equity, during those years. So what you would do is just try to be excellent at your work and go by hard work pays off. But I think once you start to see that you're not promoted as I would say, as soon as your male counterparts, regardless of whether you're delivering more, then you start asking yourself questions. But the challenge was that we didn't have mentor at the time. There was not, at least in the banks I was working for, sort of mentorship programs, or the realization that probably women, once they hit middle management, then they will stuck there. So that was one of the biggest challenge. The second, I think, was also probably not being aware that soft skills at a certain level are as important, sometimes more important than the technical skills. Because at a certain point, as I mentioned, in a very competitive environment, you are hired because of the technical skills and how, I think you presented yourself and how you were able to solve issues. But the use of soft skills, negotiation skills, emotional intelligence, empathy, leadership skills, that, we didn't have access to it. So I think today, young women who are entering finance now, I think, have more opportunities to already, more knowledge, are more informed, but also more opportunities to go through those trainings and having also these frameworks in place where they're going to be guided and supported throughout the organizations. There's still a lot of progress, but at least these are opportunities that are available today. If I take now the example of Rwanda, I think I'm part of a generation of women that are really lucky to have leadership that truly embraces gender empowerment. So when I moved back to Rwanda the first time, and I was telling my former colleagues, oh, I'm senior advisor to the Minister in Foreign Affairs, they were like, oh my goodness, how do people in the ministry react to having a woman Minister of Foreign Affairs and then the senior advisor who's a woman? And I was like, actually, they don't ask that question, because in Rwanda, people are now used to having women in leadership positions. So it's not a question they ask. And this is really, I think, something that people don't realize that much, that the change in mindset is also by seeing those examples and seeing, once you've had one or two ministers women, it's no longer an issue for the male or the female staff. The second thing is also, I think, because it happens a lot, and Rwanda was no exception, once you have laws that promote women, some people might think that you're getting the position just because you're a woman. So it also puts a burden and I think a heightened pressure to really prove that you're there because of your competence. But not having to renegade also the fact that you are female, because sometimes you can have a tendency to say, if I want to promote gender equity, then it will be seen as actually her only agenda is gender equity, not the delivering results. So I think the challenge was to have a balance of that in Rwanda, and I think we're lucky to have a president that supports women, but is also results oriented, and people know it, so they know you cannot be appointed if you're not going to deliver results, and it's sort of then facilitate or makes our work easier, as in, yeah, the work will be tough to deliver, same as our male colleagues have to perform, but the fact that I'm a woman, whatever I bring to the table, and making sure that also, as I was mentioning, make sure that I'm supporting all the women to also be the leaders of the future, then it's also giving them that sort of model that you have to be performing regardless, and sometimes you will have to perform twice better so that you get the credibility you need. But I think as women, we learn to do things more thoroughly, because that's how the world it is. You have to prove yourself time and time again. But for me, I think that those two examples would exemplify what the challenges were and the reason why, and I think how I've been able to cope with them.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, you touched on so many different aspects of the issues with gender equality. I mean, one being gender bias and having to prove yourself, and really proving that you didn't get the job just because you're a woman. But also, importantly, you're a wonderful role model, and that's what this partnership is really trying to do, is to promote the visibility of all these wonderful role models such as yourself, and Amanda has done a wonderful job building the organization over the last 20 years, and having mentorship is so important, right? The connection with younger women, feeling that they can also get to positions similar to what you have done, and your accomplishments are really amazing and really to be applauded. What I heard you say a little bit was that you feel that gender parity has made great strides in Rwanda. And do you feel that there is the same sense of what is required to have gender parity globally or in Africa in general, or do you think it's really specific to the country and the leadership of that country?
I think for me that gender parity, and maybe one lesson one can take out of the journey that Rwanda has been on for the last, I would say, 20 years or 21 years, because really gender parity started right after the genocide, was one that if there's no political will for gender equity, it will never come naturally. So you have to put laws in place, regulation in place that forces organizations, and here in Rwanda really was in the public sector, to make sure that 30% of leaders of not only in government or in parliament, but also state-owned enterprises, they have 30% of women in their boards. And by giving an example in government, and our parliament really now at 61% of women MPs, is a result of that. So the political will, but also the legal framework that makes sure that we have, what that minimum, that quota that sometimes people are against, but then it also makes sure that women are given a chance, and they also open up to being in parliament, later on in cabinet as well. So today, for instance, Rwanda in cabinet, there's parity, and now we have even more women. 52% of cabinet is by women, but this has taken really 20-25 years. And secondly, and I think here where we also would think that then that progress in public sector trickle down to private sector, it hasn't yet happened. There's been progress, but I think for Rwanda, we still have more efforts to make in terms of gender equality in private sector. And it might even be more difficult because for an entrepreneur, they will hire and say that they hire the best, but if they have gender bias, how are you going to oblige them, especially if it's my own company, to hire more women or to promote them at leadership positions? But I think that is not different when we look at what's happening globally. I think I was reading a report from Oliver Wyman Welland to see how many women we have now in financial sector globally. And you can see that in the executive committee, it's still 23%, and at board level, 25%. So, but then of course they go back to like in the early 2000s, where you only have, 10 to 11% of women in boards. So now we can say, yes, there's progress, but is that enough? Not at all. And then it's really also how in Rwanda we translate that success in public sector to the private sector, and also I think engage the private sector, being company owners, company managers, to make sure that they appoint women and make sure that they have a pipeline of women that can be take on leadership positions, and make sure that they're given opportunities and trainings and support, because it cannot happen overnight. At the central bank level, we've also made sure that in the regulation, and especially in governance of banks, we ensure that financial institutions that we regulate have in their board a minimum of 30% of women. So not all banks have complied yet, but at least it's something that has been translated in our regulatory framework. And it's up to us, since we really have to approve those board members, that we make sure that they're respected. But there's still a long way to go, I believe, but it's up to really, I think, regulators, supervisory authority to also include in their regulatory frameworks the gender aspect to it. So hopefully we can see more change in our private sector as well.
So that's interesting, because some of those numbers are above the numbers in other countries. What would you say that other countries can learn from Rwanda, both in the public and private sector? And we heard you speak about regulations, but there has to be other elements that are contributing to some of the success of having a higher number of senior women.
Absolutely. I think regulation is one thing, but also what will make people change their mindset about the abilities of women at the helm of institutions, their competencies, but also the fact that they are better off having, inclusive executive committees and board committees. And I think that is a very complex question. I think one, it's making sure that you prepare leaders and also recognize that, women have not been in leadership for long. So there are some skills that they need to learn, and you have to give them a chance. So I think for me, also trainings in leadership, in negotiations, that how we always say men have been dominating and being leaders for millennials. So there are things they do automatically or things they can do automatically, which sometimes for a woman need really a push. Secondly is, I think, when we look at the example of Rwanda, it was not only to say, in the laws we are asking government institutions in particular, to have 30% of women in leadership positions. It's also making sure that you can make sure that women get access to education, get access to the skills needed to be able to be in those leadership positions. So, for instance, girl education has been a priority for government, making sure that girls also have access to education. And then in fields where we had less women, if I take science and mathematics field, but also finance, make sure that they have access to that education, and then create these networks of women in those specific areas where the ones who are already on leadership position can mentor the new generation of women leaders. And I think now it's now that we really see the result in that investment done in education of women, as well as investment done in the health of women and girls. And sometimes, we cannot just look at when they start their career, it's also what happens before. Secondly, is also making sure that men are part of that journey as well. And that they are part of the motivators of women leaders. I think we cannot be advocating for gender parity and then exclude the men in the journey. So I think that is something that has worked well for Rwanda, and we certainly will continue on that path. But also, maybe what I would end with is, yes, Rwanda has made a lot of strides, and in Africa, certainly we're among the countries that have at least demonstrated that in gender equity we've made progress, and it's in sort of ingrained in what we do in all the policies. But the downside can be, now you women, you're leaders, you're, the majority in parliament, you're now the majority in cabinet, so enough. But there are other areas that need attention, private sector and financial sector being one of them. And secondly, making sure that we don't go back and start forgetting that access to education for girls sometimes is not a given, so that we still pay attention to the inequalities we have. And probably also when we look at financial inclusion and access to finance, there's still a huge gap between women and men. So it means that there can be, we cannot develop women leaders if that financial inclusion issue is not addressed. Thank you.
Yes, all such important points, and again, touching on so many different areas where we could probably talk for hours about all the individual subjects, and having men involved. Totally agree that has to happen. And what you said about having women, like really making sure that even their younger selves, their younger education is really equally important to just the focus on when women are ready to enter the world of finance at the college level, or when they're deciding what to focus on. What I think we would all love to hear, and you've already given us such great insights and great advice for young women, mid-level women, I mean, women that are at a different stage of their career, such as myself. And I think that it would be great to hear what you feel the best advice that young women aspiring to a leadership role, what's the best advice that you would give them when they're young and trying to decide what career to enter and where to focus?
It's always a question that I would almost shy away with, because one's journey is always unique, but probably, you know, so some insights on what I think has made a difference for me would be, first of all, to especially in the financial sector, try to be an expert at something. I think it's valid in the corporate world. What's the thing, the particular thing, being a sector, being a product, being an initiative that people would most recognize that you made a difference in, or that you're the best person who know it? Because I think we always say, you know, you cannot be the jack of all trades, but maybe we should also say not be the Jane of all trades, and then succeed in life. You have to have an area of expertise, which then opens doors to probably, you know, management and leadership position, because then they become broader. But at least there's a foundation you start with. Secondly, for the case of Rwanda, I think I'd probably encourage young bankers to look at sectors of growth in our economy, and then specialize in the financing of those sectors. I would probably think of manufacturing. I would probably think of ICT, but even the less glamorous, which is agriculture, still has a huge funding gap. So someone who will specialize in products that are tailored to agriculture will certainly make an impact, and will certainly be the person that people turn to find financial solutions, because it's still a sector that not only in Rwanda, but in Africa, you know, 60 to 70% of our citizens are working in. So this is, for me, something that people should consider. The other advice would be to also, I know when we're young, we think we can change the world in an instant, but you have to choose your battles. You cannot change everything overnight, but it's really the small steps, but being, I think, consistent. I want to make a change, but what resources do I currently have? If it's, for instance, you know, the battle is, you know, I want to make sure that you know, my voice is heard, so that I'm visible in what I'm doing, especially as a junior. Hence the promotion. One, how do I become excellent in what I'm doing today? What resources do I have, and what do I need? Instead of saying I want to be CEO, but you know, that's an ambition to have, but what does it take? And then there's a lot of sacrifices, and it's really, I think, step by step that you build your career. And there are sometimes, you know, some of the battles you might want to put aside, but maybe once you got the resources and the right platform, you can advocate for those causes or the change that you want to see in your organization. So I think those two would be some of the advice I can share.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think that having patience and choosing your battles is great advice. And I think that leads me to my final question before we go on to allow the audience to ask some questions is really, there's always this perception that younger women feel that the senior women, that it was easy, like that somehow, but for us it was easy, and but yet they face all these hurdles and all these difficult challenges. And I think that it is so important for young women to know and appreciate that it's a long road and that you have to persevere, and there are a lot of challenges, and like you had said before, everyone has a unique story and a unique journey of how they got to where they are in their career. And if you could look back on your career and really give advice to your younger self, and what is it that you wish you had known when you were younger that you know now, right? In terms of just your journey and how you achieved so much success and the honorable role that you're in now.
Thank you very much, Sonia. I think I'll start by probably, how to probably express how difficult it's been for women in the financial sector to get to leadership position, and why. And it's personal. I personally think that young women today actually have not only more opportunities, but it's I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's easier than, let's say, 15, 20 years ago, and even before. So I'm pretty sure when 100 Women in Finance started 20 years ago, the context or the obstacles were, humongous. It was almost like something, a mission impossible. But maybe starting with already, access to finance education or world-class finance education, or MBA for that matter. I think in Rwanda now we have, people can pursue an MBA at the Oklahoma Christian University because they've opened a campus here in Rwanda. That was not the case at the time. So someone had to go abroad to get access to that education. And in other sectors, if I take science and technology, there's the Carnegie Mellon Africa campus that it's in Kigali, so someone doesn't need to travel to the US. So already that changes a lot. You're not traveling, you don't need to navigate through cultural changes, but you can have world-class education still being in Rwanda. So that's one, I think, example that it's probably easier to get access to world-class education and not having to move. Secondly, young women in finance today, live in a world where gender equity is on the agenda of every leader, being at country level, at organization level. Some organization might choose not to take it seriously, but it's there and you have the resources. And there's also been research. So I think 20 years ago, to go and tell your boss, I don't think there's diversity in our organization, it would have been practically impossible. But now, we have data, we have statistics, and there are also tailored trainings and networks that didn't exist at that time. So I think really, yes, the competition is still there and may be heightened, but the resources and the opportunities are also there. So that's, I think, a big advantage. And probably what would I tell my younger self? And I wish I had known that there are also, when we look especially at gender equity in some sectors that are male dominated, in the corporate world, at one point, you just had no hope that things would change. But it was because I think as a younger person, I would look at, the institution, the structure of the society I was living in at the time, and feeling I had no power at all. But if I had invested more, I think more and earlier in what I could change in myself, what strengths can I build in myself? But that was within my control. You know, and you know, women, I think across the world, we struggle with self-esteem, and we're always doubting, and you know, what's talked about as the imposter syndrome. But these are things that you can work on your own, regardless of the society. It might be very difficult in a very patriarchal society, but this is within your control. And once you master that, and I think chart your own course of what you want to do and have analyzed the resources you need, then probably would have made it easier for me when I was younger. And the last thing is also, I think, not to be afraid to ask for help. I think as women, I mean, 20 years ago, a strong woman, superwoman, she does it on her own, but it never works. So I wish I would have known that also earlier in my career, and I ask help. And actually we find that there are people who are ready to help, but if we don't ask, then it, you know, it becomes more difficult. So I think those were the things that I probably wish I had known before and use more efficiently. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, that's one of my big ones as well, is looking back to not be afraid to ask for help. And I find just in managing so many women and men in my own company, the men are much more ready to say, can someone explain that to me? I don't understand that, versus women have a hard time really asking for help and admitting they don't understand something, because maybe we're all perfectionists. I don't know. But thank you so much for your wonderful insights, for sharing your story, and all the hard work that you have done to promote women, and the work you continue to do. And really, I think everyone will agree you are an exceptional role model. And really, it's an honor to have launched this series with 100 Women and UNCDF with you. And thank you for being so honest and so frank and really personable and everything. It's very genuine, and we appreciate it. So back to you, Esther, if we have any questions from the audience.
Yes, thank you so much, Sonia and Soraya. What a fantastic discussion. Do any audience members have questions they would like to ask? Yes, Preeti, please.
Yeah, hello, Soraya and Sonia. Esther, so I'll start off while others ponder about their thoughts. So I wanted to first, of course, thank Soraya for sharing so personally her leadership, aspirations and goals, and how that shaped her career. Thank you so much, Soraya. Very, very genuine and very useful for other women. So my question is, when you talked about, access to finance for women, as you know, at the UN Capital Development Fund, our focus is on creating such structures that could then benefit, for example, access to finance for women in Rwanda. So my question to you is, what structures domestically can we create along with you and other leadership in Rwanda? And would you see domestic financing supporting that? Would you see some partnership with international capital as well coming in? So what could be a structure that we could work on together post this meeting? And then what we're trying to do is, get you and others like you in direct contact with some of the sort of pension funds, et cetera, sitting in New York and other capitals. So kind of what would be your message to them? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Preeti. And again, thank you for this invitation to speak at this event. And I think I will almost take your willingness to work with Rwanda on financial inclusion. I think probably speaking at the central bank level, we have put in place a standalone department on financial sector development and financial inclusion to really give it the attention it's due, even though when we look at financial inclusion data in the past, I would say I would say 5 years, there's a survey that has been done on financial inclusion, where we've seen that 93% of our population now, has access to some type of financial services, which was about 60% in 2014 or 15, if I'm not mistaken. However, on the women's side, and also the array of products that people have access to, that we need to really make sure that we broaden it. So I think one would be happy to engage with UN Capital Development Fund to look at the best products, especially for women, that would work, and also I think I include the financial literacy, so that we are sure that they're being educated on the financial services, how to use them. We know women in microfinance, for instance, are the ones who pay on time, but also, instead of giving them these standard products, it's loan. But how do they, for instance, if they are women entrepreneurs, get access to equity? How do we prepare them to pitch to investors, to be able to choose what best capital work for them? So, would like to continue this conversation with UN Capital Development Fund, and see how we can probably, maybe coming from investment banking and corporate banking, I would look at a fund, but what sort of fund could we put in place? And then knowing that we still need a lot of, to build skills in fund management, and looking to attracting international investors in the country, and focusing really on the financing of women entrepreneurs, which I think would really make a huge impact. Thank you. And I think the second was the message to women across the world. And if I understand correctly, I think for me, really, and I'm sorry to insist about it, is the leadership of its country. His Excellency President Paul Kagame, has said from the get-go, women have to be part and parcel of our economic development. And he starts by himself as, as an appointing authority, who do I appoint in cabinet? And it's not only when he started speaking about it, but through the years you see the progress. And having had, I think, the honor to be in his cabinet, at one point as women leaders, he would challenge us and saying, how come you're not addressing this issue on gender equity? So I think it's empowering to have also, a leader, and especially I think a men leader who always challenge you to say, there's still more you can do, and also giving you that opportunity to be able to serve at a high level, and I think not only inspire other women, but make sure that we have many more women that could take up those leadership positions. The second is also, I think, as women leaders, maybe we take it for granted that we are empowering, especially young women in the financial sector, but we take time to listen to their aspirations. It's another generation, and probably not assume that we understand the challenges and obstacles because we've gone through them. They might have other challenges we haven't thought about. So I think it's important that we also take time to listen to their aspirations and the obstacles or the approach to for them to build their career, and not want them to emulate what we've gone through, because the world is different. So I think that would be my message.
Thank you
so
Soraya.
much, Soraya. We're going to try to get in 2 more questions before we finish. I know we're going a few minutes over, so we beg everyone's indulgence. One is from Amanda, who says that 100 Women in Finance is launching a pre-internship jumpstart program this year for first and second year students at universities across Africa. And would you be willing to share your story with this group? That would be very helpful. So if that was something you would consider, Soraya, we can follow up with you afterwards and link you with 100 Women in Finance. And the last question is from Joyce Delamini. How can one work with policymakers and regulators effectively without being labeled as too forward? It's very discouraging as you are seen as not doing your job or work or improving your organization by anybody out there, yet it is because of the glass ceilings that you're hitting within your company and country in general.
I think that's a great question. And
it is a great question. It's three questions, really.
Yeah, I think the first one is how can one work with policymakers and regulators without being labeled as too forward? And probably as a former policymaker and new regulator, I think, but probably my assessment might be wrong. It's also how you deal with everyone, other stakeholders. Of course, I think sometimes it can be used as intimidation when someone doesn't want you to make your points, to say you're too forward, you're too ambitious, you're too this and too that. But as far as you respectfully state your points, I think you should not change, as you have your arguments, you've done your homework, and it's respectfully really putting forward your arguments. Now, it's true that sometimes as a woman, the feedback you'll get will be more towards the gender. You shouldn't do like this, but it's really also, that's why the soft skills are important to sort of read the person in front of you and respectfully argue your point and make your point valid. I know it's not always easy to deal with regulators, but that certainly might help. And secondly, I think the financial sector and as any competitive sector can be very discouraging, and I think maybe what I'm going to say is provocative. Also, when it's discouraging or when it's tough, try not to think of yourself as a woman. And the reason I'm saying that is I'm a professional first and foremost, and not put the limits as, oh, since I'm a woman, maybe I shouldn't say this. No, you're a professional. Then just deliver as a professional. I think that has helped me, and I know I'm sorry to be maybe too personal, but I've had debates with other women leaders or women colleagues when I would say that sometimes if I think too much about, I'm a woman, so I should do this, I would go in a negotiation, I would try to conclude a deal already having sort of put limits on myself. So I think for me, it's when maybe you're discouraged that you have to say, I'm a professional, and people will look at you as a professional before you're a woman. It doesn't always work, but I hope that can help. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Soraya, for your wonderful advice, and Sonia for ably facilitating the fireside chat. Thank you to Preeti Sinha and Amanda Pullinger for sharing their time with us. And thank you to all our attendees for joining this webinar. I think it's been really energizing to hear the fantastic example of institution building that all of these institutions are working on, that 100 Women has been working on for 20 years to expand the network that you were talking about, Soraya, that young women enjoy now, of resources and mentorship that's available. We really look forward to helping to expand and build this network across Africa. And we hope that our attendees will watch out for notifications of 3 other events this year in Africa. They'll be virtual as well, so everyone can join in Nigeria, South Africa, and Kenya. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.